The air inside Nexus 7's cantina was thick with smoke from a dozen different worlds. Purple vapor from Zelkan pipes mixed with the sweet scent of burning crystalline herbs that the insectoid Thrix favored. The massive space station orbited at the edge of civilized space, a perfect meeting ground for those who preferred to work in the shadows. Captain Vexitai ran one clawed finger along the scar that crossed his left eye, a souvenir from the Battle of Kepler Prime 3 years ago. His dark green skin bore the ritual markings of a Karathi warrior who had survived 50 campaigns. Around the circular table sat his crew of 7, each one a veteran killer worth their weight in refined plasma. To his right sat Crix, a small, explosive expert whose pale blue skin could camouflage perfectly against most metallic surfaces. The little alien's forearms moved constantly, assembling and disassembling small devices with nervous energy. Across from him lounged Zarath, a massive red-skinned brute from the warrior planet of Gorax. Her people stood 9 feet tall and could tear through steel plating with their bare hands. The cantina buzzed with activity. At least 200 mercenaries from across the galaxy had gathered for tonight's contract auction. Vextai recognized most of the faces. There was Captain Mordak with his crew of Void Hunters, veterans who specialized in ship-to-ship combat. Near the bar stood the infamous Black Star Company, cyber-enhanced soldiers who had never lost a ground assault. The hollow projector at the center of the room flickered to life, casting a blue 3-dimensional image of a middle-aged human in an expensive suit. Corporate type, definitely from one of the inner worlds where credits flowed like water. "Gentlemen, ladies, and honored beings," the human began, his voice carrying clearly through the cantina's speakers. "I represent Titan Mining Consortium. We have a situation on Kepler 442b that requires immediate resolution." The image shifted to show a rocky planet with massive mining installations scattered across its surface. Huge mechanical extractors pulled precious metals from the ground while orbital platforms processed the raw materials. It looked like a standard, corporate world, the kind that made fortunes for those willing to strip mine entire planets. "Local resistance has seized control of our primary facilities," the contractor continued. "Standard corporate security forces have proven inadequate. We need the situation resolved quickly and quietly. Payment is 20 million credits, split among the successful crew." A wave of excited murmurs swept through the cantina. 20 million was serious money, enough to buy a small fleet or retire to one of the pleasure worlds in the Centauri sector. Vextai felt his pulse quicken. With that kind of payment, he could finally upgrade his ship's weapons systems and maybe even buy that second vessel he'd been dreaming about. "Intelligence suggests we're dealing with standard planetary militia," the hologram went on. "Poorly equipped locals with mining equipment converted to weapons. However, our sources indicate that Earthborn units may be present as reinforcements." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The cantina fell silent, as if someone had activated a sound dampener. Conversations that had been animated moments before died mid-sentence. Even the 6-armed bartender, who had been mixing drinks with fluid precision, froze with all his tentacles suspended in mid-air. Vextai watched in amazement as seasoned killers began rising from their tables. Captain Mordak was already heading for the exit, his crew following without a backward glance. The Black Star Company commander shook his head firmly and powered down his bid display. Within minutes, half the cantina had emptied. "What in the void is happening?" muttered Zarath, her deep voice confused. "It's just humans, soft little pink things that die if you breathe on them wrong." Crix's forearms had stopped moving entirely, a sure sign the demolitions expert was seriously worried. "Captain, maybe we should reconsider. If the others are backing out, there might be something we don't know." Vexitai slammed his fist on the table, making their drinks jump. "Cowards, all of them!" His yellow eyes blazed with anger and opportunity. "Humans are just another species. They have no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities. They live maybe 80 years, if they're lucky. What could possibly make hardened warriors afraid of such weak creatures?" He looked around at his remaining crew. Only about 30 mercenaries remained in the cantina, most looking uncertain. The massive payout had just become much more attainable with fewer competitors. "Think about it," Vextai continued, his voice growing more confident. 20 million, credits split among far fewer crews. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, and these fools are walking away because of old spacer tales and superstition. His communications officer, a thin reptilian creature named Slek, hissed nervously. Captain, perhaps we should at least research these Earthborn units before committing. Research what? Humans have been in space for barely 3 centuries. My people have been warriors for 3 millennia. We've fought the crystal beings of Andromeda, survived the robot uprising on Vega Prime, and conquered the gas giant cities of the Helix Nebula. What could these short-lived primates possibly do that we haven't seen before? The holo projector crackled as the contractor's image returned. I see we have fewer interested parties than expected. For those remaining, the offer stands at 20 million with a bonus of 5 million for rapid completion, 25 million credits. Vextai's eyes widened. That was enough to become a major player in the mercenary business, maybe even start his own private army. He reached for his bid pad without hesitation. Captain, Crix whispered urgently, every veteran in this cantina just walked away. Maybe they know something we don't. Vextai paused, his claw hovering over the acceptance button. Around him, the remaining mercenaries were still hesitating, clearly torn between greed and caution. The smart play would be to leave, to trust the judgment of more experienced killers. But 25 million credits was more money than he'd ever dreamed of. Fear is the enemy of profit, he growled, and pressed the button. The pad chimed softly, confirming his bid. We're taking this job, and when we're swimming in credits on some tropical paradise, we'll laugh about how scared everyone was of a few primitive humans. His crew exchanged worried glances, but none of them objected. The promise of wealth was too strong, and loyalty to their captain ran deep. They would follow Vextai into hell itself if he ordered it. They had no idea they were about to do exactly that. The massive mining planet Kepler 442b hung in space like a wounded giant. Its surface was covered with deep scars, where corporate extractors had torn precious metals from the ground for decades. Vextai's assault ship, Bloodfang, descended through the thin atmosphere, followed by 2 smaller gunships carrying his crew and equipment. Sensors show minimal orbital defenses, reported Slek from the communications station. Just a few automated defense platforms, nothing our shields can't handle. Vextai studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The mining facilities sprawled across the planet's surface like a metal spider web. Huge processing plants, storage depots, and worker settlements connected by elevated transport tubes. It looked exactly like every other corporate world he'd liberated over the years. Begin the assault, he ordered. Standard corporate liberation protocol. Disable their communications first, then secure the primary facilities. The attack went perfectly. Vexitai's gunships swept over the outer defenses, their plasma cannons reducing the automated turrets to smoking scrap. The corporate security forces put up token resistance before falling back to secondary positions. Within 2 hours, the aliens controlled the spaceport and 3 major processing facilities. This is almost insulting, growled Zarath, her red skin gleaming with sweat as she hefted her massive pulse rifle. Corporate Marines are running away before we even engage them properly. Where's the sport in this? Crix was busy placing explosive charges on key support structures, his forearms working with practiced efficiency. Maybe they're just smart enough to know when they're outgunned. We have superior firepower, better armor, and twice their numbers. The little demolitions expert paused to admire his handiwork. Each charge was precisely placed to bring down the entire section of the facility if needed. Besides, why complain about easy money? But Vextai felt uneasy. In 50 campaigns, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Corporate security forces were usually stubborn defenders who fought for every credit of their paycheck. This organized retreat felt wrong, like they were being led into something. Advanced teams report, he barked into his comm unit. Section A secured minimal resistance, came the first reply. Section B clear, found it abandoned, reported another. Section C, wait, we're getting movement here. Multiple contacts, human. Signatures. Finally, some real opposition. Vextai grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. All units converge on Section C, let's finish this. The central processing facility was a maze of twisted metal walkways, massive grinding machines, and conveyor systems that stretched for kilometers. Steam hissed from broken pipes, and emergency lights cast eerie red shadows across the industrial landscape. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Vextai led 20 of his best warriors through the main entrance. Their advanced battle armor clanked against the metal flooring as they moved in standard formation. Thermal sensors showed heat signatures scattered throughout the facility, but the readings were strange, inconsistent. 6 human contacts North Corridor, whispered his tracker, a thin alien whose species could detect heartbeats from 100 meters away. They're not moving, might be dead. They rounded a corner and found them. 6 human Marines in basic corporate armor crouched behind an improvised barricade of mining equipment. They looked young, maybe in their 20s, with the kind of soft features that marked them as coming from one of the comfortable inner worlds. Squad leader Kim Do-yun was the oldest at maybe 30, with tired eyes and 3 days of stubble on his face. His armor bore the scratches and burns of recent fighting, and his rifle was a standard corporate issue weapon. Nothing special. Behind the barricade, his 5 Marines looked scared, but determined. Surrender now, and you'll be treated according to Galactic War conventions, Vextai called out in standard trade tongue. It was the usual offer, though he rarely honored it. Dead prisoners didn't need food or transport. Do-yun looked at his Marines, then back at the overwhelming alien force. 20 heavily armed mercenaries with military-grade weapons and armor, against 6 humans with mining company equipment. Any sane commander would surrender. Instead, Do-yun smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or a confident one. It was the kind of smile a predator makes when it's backed into a corner and decides to take as many enemies with it as possible. Earthborn Terra 7 inbound, crackled a voice over their communications system. Hold position. Reinforcements arriving in 6 hours. 6 hours. Vextai almost laughed. These humans thought they could hold off a superior force for 6 hours with mining equipment and determination. It was suicide. Your choice, he growled and signaled the attack. What happened next changed everything Vextai thought he knew about warfare. The humans didn't fight like any species he'd encountered before. They didn't try to hold their position or fight a defensive battle. Instead, they scattered like smoke, disappearing into the facility's maze of machinery and service tunnels. Then the explosions started. Crix had placed charges throughout the facility, but someone had gotten to them first. Modified mining explosives, detonated in carefully planned sequences, bringing down sections of ceiling and blocking escape routes. The aliens found themselves separated and lost in a facility that was rapidly becoming a death trap. They're using the conveyor systems, shouted Zareth over the comm. Moving through the machinery like they built this place. Private Lee Ji-won crawled through an ore processing tube that was barely wide enough for a human. Behind her, she could hear the frustrated roars of the massive red alien trying to follow. The tube led to a junction where she could access the facility's power grid. She pulled out a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from mining equipment and communications gear. Corporate Marines weren't supposed to know how to hack industrial systems, but humans had a talent for improvisation that other species found baffling. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but now the facility was running on backup systems that the humans controlled. Sergeant Park Hyok had found his way to the main processing center, where massive grinders normally crushed raw ore into powder. The machinery was powerful enough to process solid rock, which meant it could handle pretty much anything. He waited in the shadows until 3 aliens moved into position below, then activated the system. Tons of crushing machinery descended with mechanical precision. The battle raged for 4 hours. Every time Vextai's forces thought they had the humans pinned down, another explosion would reorganize the battlefield. Mining lasers became sniper weapons. Ore carts became mobile cover. Even the facility's waste disposal system was turned into a weapon. Private Kim Naeon had been a chemistry student before joining the corporate Marines. She knew exactly what would happen when she mixed the cleaning solvents from the maintenance section with the metal polish from the equipment bay. The resulting chemical cloud sent 3 aliens to the medical bay with severe respiratory damage. But the humans were taking losses too. Lee Ji-won didn't make it out of the processing center. Park Hyok fell defending the main corridor. By the time reinforcements finally arrived, only Do Yun and 2 Marines were still fighting. When the smoke cleared, Vextai controlled the facility. Technically, he had won, but 12 of his warriors were dead or seriously wounded. His advanced equipment was damaged. His carefully planned assault had turned into a nightmare of urban warfare that cost him more than some planetary invasions. "What manner of beings fight without hope of victory?" whispered Doc Rel, his medic, as she tended to Zarath's acid burns. The big warrior would recover, but she'd carry scars for the rest of her life. Vextai stood among the wreckage, staring at the bodies of the human Marines. They had fought for 6 hours against impossible odds, using nothing but determination and improvised weapons. They had turned a simple facility into a fortress and made every meter cost blood. For the first time in his career, victory felt like defeat. The underground tunnels beneath the mining facility stretched for kilometers, like the veins of some massive creature. Emergency lighting cast long shadows on the rough-cut walls as Vextai's remaining forces moved deeper into the complex. The air was thick with dust and the metallic smell of processed ore. "Motion detector shows something ahead," whispered Crix, his 4 arms adjusting the scanning equipment. "Single life form, wounded, about 50 meters down the main tunnel." Vextai signaled for his team to advance carefully. After the brutal fight in the processing center, he wasn't taking any chances. The humans had proven they could turn anything into a weapon, and underground tunnels were perfect for ambushes. They found him in a side chamber that had once been used for equipment storage. A Zelkan mercenary sat propped against the wall, his insectoid body broken and bleeding green fluid onto the floor. His 3 eyes, normally bright yellow, were dim with pain and something else. Fear. Zelkans were known throughout the galaxy as some of the toughest fighters alive. Their natural chitin armor could stop most small arms fire, and their forearms made them deadly in close combat. This one wore the black and silver markings of the Void Reaper Company, one of the most feared mercenary units in known space. "Please," the Zelkan rasped in trade tongue. "Don't leave me here, they'll come back for wounded." Vextai knelt beside the injured alien, studying the damage. The chitin armor was cracked in several places, and one arm hung at an impossible angle. But the wounds weren't from energy weapons or explosives. They looked like they had been made by crude tools, improvised weapons. "Who did this to you?" Vextai asked. The Zelkan's 3 eyes focused on him with difficulty. "You're new here, part of the latest wave. You should have left when they mentioned. Earthborn units. Should have run like the smart ones did." "What are you talking about? We just fought 6 humans with mining equipment. Barely worth calling a battle." A sound came from the Zelkan that might have been laughter if it wasn't so bitter. 6 humans. You think that was the main force? Those were just the advanced scouts, the ones they leave behind to slow you down. Doc Rel, Vextai's medic, was already working on the wounded alien, sealing the worst of the cuts with emergency medical foam. "How long have you been down here?" she asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. Hard to tell without natural light. The Zelkan's voice grew stronger as the medical treatment took effect. "I was part of the first assault wave. 60 mercenaries from 5 different companies. We thought it would be easy money, just like you did." "What happened?" Vextai leaned closer, something cold forming in his stomach. They happened. Earthborn. Terra 7. I saw the ship come down during our second day on planet. Looked like an old transport vessel, nothing special. We laughed when we saw it. Figured the corporation was so desperate, they hired some washed-up veterans with obsolete equipment. The Zelkan paused, his breathing heavy. "I was at Centauri during the rebellion. Thought I'd seen everything war could offer. I was wrong. Centauri." Vextai had heard stories about that conflict, a full-scale rebellion that had lasted almost 2 years, with entire star systems fighting for independence from the corporate council. It had been one of the bloodiest wars in recent galactic history. "Tell me about Centauri," Vextai said quietly. The wounded mercenary's 3 eyes seemed to look through him, seeing something far away and terrible. It was supposed to be a simple pacification mission, 3 full invasion fleets over 50,000 ground troops, the best equipment the corporate council could buy. We were facing a bunch of colonists with farming tools and mining equipment. "Sounds familiar," muttered Zarath. The rebellion was already failing when we arrived. Most of the rebel leadership was dead or captured. Only one pocket of resistance remained holed up in the ruins of New Shanghai Colony. One company of Earthborn units, maybe 200 humans total. The Zelkan's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to lean in closer. Command figured we'd wrap it up in a week. How hard could it be to dig out 200 desperate rebels? 6 months, he whispered. They held out for 6 months against everything we could throw at them. The conditions alone should have killed them. New Shanghai had been bombed flat. No infrastructure, no supplies, winter temperatures that dropped to 40 below zero. Doc Rel paused in her treatment. Impossible. No species can survive in those conditions without proper equipment. That's what we thought. But humans aren't like other species. They don't just adapt to harsh conditions, they thrive in them. While our troops needed heated shelters and regular supply drops, the humans were living in the ruins, like it was their natural habitat. Crix's 4 arms had stopped moving entirely, something that only happened when the demolitions expert was deeply disturbed. How did they manage supplies, food, weapons, medical treatment? The Zelkan laughed again, that same bitter sound. They made everything they needed from scraps and corpses. Dead soldiers became sources of equipment and rations. Destroyed vehicles became shelters and weapons. They turned the entire ruined city into a fortress using nothing but debris and determination. But you outnumbered them 200 to 1, Vextai protested. Superior firepower, air support, orbital bombardment capabilities. None of it mattered. Every time we thought we had them cornered, they'd disappear into tunnels we didn't know existed. Every time we secured a position, they'd take it back using tactics no military academy ever taught. They fought like they had nothing left to lose because in their minds, they didn't. The alien's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Other species fight to win. Humans fight like the survival of their entire race depends on every single battle. When they're truly backed into a corner, they access something that scares the hell out of every other intelligent species in the galaxy. What? Vextai asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Pure, focused hatred combined, with absolute refusal to quit. It's not tactical, it's psychological warfare on a level we can't comprehend. They don't just want to defeat you, they want to break your will to fight completely. The Zelkan struggled to sit up straighter. I watched seasoned combat veterans, aliens who had fought in dozens of campaigns, break down crying after fighting humans for just a few days. Not from physical wounds, but from the psychological pressure of facing an enemy that never gives. Up never retreats, never accepts that anything is impossible. How did it end? Doc Rel asked quietly. Command finally gave up and pulled out. Officially, they called it a strategic redeployment. Unofficially, they were terrified of what the humans might do if pushed any further. 200 humans had defeated 50,000 professional soldiers simply by refusing to lose. Vextai felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine fear. And you think these Earthborn units here are the same type? The Zelkan's 3 eyes met his. I recognize the tactics. The way they use the environment against you, turn your own strengths into weaknesses, make every victory cost more than defeat. This isn't just warfare. It's an art form they've perfected over centuries of fighting on a death world. What death world? Earth, the human homeworld. Research it sometime. A planet where the weather can kill you. The animals hunt in packs, and even the plants are poisonous. Humans spent thousands of years as persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. When that's your evolutionary background, 6 hours of impossible odds is just another day at the office. The wounded mercenary closed his eyes. When Terra 7 arrives in full force, this won't be a battle. It'll be a demonstration of why experienced mercenaries refuse contracts involving Earthborn units. Mark my words, Captain. Before this is over, you'll understand why the mention of humans can empty a cantina full of the galaxy's most dangerous killers. Vextai stood slowly, his mind racing. Everything about this contract had been wrong from the start. The easy initial victory, the organized retreat, the way those 6 Marines had fought without hope of survival. They hadn't been fighting to win. They had been buying time, and now that time was almost up. The first sign something was wrong came at 0300 hours, when Outpost 7 went silent. Vexatai was reviewing tactical maps in his command center when the communication feed simply cut out. Mid-sentence. No explosion, no distress call, no static, just silence. Probably equipment failure, muttered Quill, his reptilian fingers dancing across the communications array. The Zephyrian was known for his reliability, having served as communications officer for 8 years without missing a single transmission. These mining facilities have old equipment that breaks down constantly, but Vextai felt that familiar chill in his gut. Try Outpost 4. Quill's scaled face showed concern as he adjusted the frequencies. No response from 4 either, Captain, or 5, or 6. His voice grew more worried with each failed contact. All perimeter positions have gone dark. Equipment doesn't fail. Simultaneously across 6 positions, growled Zarath, checking her massive pulse rifle for the 3rd time in an hour. The red-skinned warrior had been on edge ever since their conversation with the wounded Zelkan. Something's out there. Vextai activated the long-range scanners, expecting to see dropships or assault craft approaching their position. The displays showed empty sky. No heat signatures, no engine trails, no electromagnetic emissions. Whatever had happened to his perimeter guards, it hadn't involved conventional military tactics. "Sir," called out his tracker, a nervous insectoid named Kitik, whose species could detect heartbeats from hundreds of meters away. "I'm getting strange readings, life signs appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Movement patterns don't match any known species." "Show me." The tactical display lit up with dozens of small red dots moving through the facility's outer sections. But the patterns were wrong. Instead of advancing in formation or following standard assault protocols, the contacts moved like smoke, appearing in one location and vanishing only to reappear somewhere else entirely. "How are they moving so fast?" Crix asked, his forearms nervously assembling small explosive devices. "Those are human life signs, but they're covering distances that should take hours in minutes." The answer came from an unexpected source. Private Lee Jiwon's voice crackled over an open frequency, transmitted from somewhere deep in the facility's maintenance sections. "Attention, alien forces. This is Terra 7 Advanced Reconnaissance. You have exactly 1 hour to surrender before we begin active operations. This is your only warning." The transmission cut off before anyone could respond. Quill frantically tried to trace the signal, but it seemed to have come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "1 hour?" Zarath laughed, but there was no humor in. "That can't be more than a few dozen of them. We still have 47 combat-ready warriors with military-grade equipment." Vextai wasn't so sure. The tactical display now showed human contacts throughout the facility, moving through areas his own forces hadn't even explored yet. Somehow, Terra 7 had infiltrated their position without being detected and established a presence in every major section. "How did they get past our sensors?" he demanded. "Captain," Kitik's voice was shaking, "I don't think they came from outside. The life signs are emerging from sections we've already cleared. It's like they were hiding in the walls themselves." The attacks began exactly 1 hour later. Captain Lee Min-hyuk led the first strike team through ventilation shafts that hadn't been designed for human use. The passages were barely wide enough for his shoulders, filled with dust and sharp metal edges that would have deterred most species. But humans had evolved crawling through caves and tight spaces, and Terra 7 had trained in environments that made these conditions look comfortable. "Alpha team in position," he whispered into his throat mic. "Bravo team, what's your status?" "Ready." "To light them up," came the reply from Sergeant Kim Tae-hyun, positioned in the facility's power distribution center. "Their night vision gear is about to become a liability." The solar flare hit at exactly the right moment. Min-hyuk had calculated the timing based on stellar weather patterns, something that required knowledge of astrophysics most military officers never bothered learning. The electromagnetic pulse. From the star disabled every piece of electronic equipment in the facility for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. In those 4 minutes, Terra 7 moved like ghosts through the darkness. The aliens' advanced night vision systems, designed to give them an overwhelming advantage in low-light conditions, suddenly became useless. Worse, the residual electromagnetic interference left them partially blind while the humans, relying on natural senses and simple optical devices, moved with perfect coordination. "Contact! Contact!" screamed one of Vextai's warriors over the comm system as it came back online. "They're everywhere. How are they seeing in the dark?" The answer was simple. They weren't seeing, they were feeling. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who could track prey by sound, smell, and vibration. In total darkness, these senses actually became sharper, while aliens dependent on technology found themselves helpless. Lieutenant Park Soo-young had positioned her team in the facility's structural support area, where Crix had placed his carefully calculated explosive charges. But instead of disabling them, she had modified each device with components salvaged from mining equipment. "Detonation in 3, 2, 1, she whispered. The explosions were precisely calibrated not to destroy the facility, but to create specific structural weaknesses. Support beams that looked solid would collapse under stress. Walkways that appeared safe would crumble when aliens tried to cross them. The facility itself became a weapon against its occupiers. But the psychological warfare was even more devastating. Then the physical attacks. "They're learning," reported Vextai's tactical officer, a cybernetically enhanced Karathi named Vexnor. "Every defensive position we establish, they find a counter within hours. Every tactic we use, they adapt to faster than our computers can process." It was true. When Vextai's forces tried to use their superior firepower, the humans disappeared into areas where heavy weapons couldn't be used effectively. When the aliens attempted to secure high ground, they found their positions had been undermined with surgical precision. When they tried to predict human movements, the patterns changed completely. "It's like fighting smoke," whispered Zarath, her usual confidence shattered. The massive warrior had taken shrapnel in 3 separate ambushes, each one perfectly timed, to catch her forces at their most vulnerable moment. How can they coordinate so perfectly without advanced communications? The answer lay in something most alien species had never developed: intuitive tactical awareness. Humans had spent millennia hunting in small groups where survival depended on reading subtle cues from teammates. A glance, a gesture, a barely audible sound could convey complex tactical information between human soldiers. Corporal Choi Min-jae demonstrated this perfectly when his squad encountered 6 aliens in the main corridor. Without a word being spoken, his team split into 3 pairs, executed a perfect flanking maneuver, and eliminated the entire enemy group in less than 30 seconds. To the aliens watching through security cameras, it looked like telepathic coordination. "Sir," Quill's voice was barely controlled panic, "we've lost contact with sections A through F. Whatever forces they brought, they're moving through our positions like we're not even there." Vextai studied the tactical display with growing horror. Red zones marked areas where his forces had been eliminated or forced to retreat. The pattern showed methodical, relentless advance that spoke of professional military precision, combined with something else. Something that made his evolutionary survival instincts scream warnings. "How many humans are we actually fighting?" he asked. "Sensors show approximately 200 life signs," Kittick reported, "but they're moving like they have 5 times that number. The coordination is impossible unless what? Unless they're operating as a true hive mind. But humans aren't telepathic. How are they achieving this level of tactical synchronization?" The answer came from Captain Lee Min-hyuk himself, broadcasting on an open frequency that every alien could hear. "This is Terra 7 Actual. We're not just fighting you as individuals. We're fighting as extensions of each other, as parts of a single organism dedicated to one purpose: your complete removal from this facility. You're not facing 200 separate enemies. You're facing one entity with 200 bodies, and every body knows exactly what every other body is doing." The transmission ended, leaving Vextai's remaining forces in stunned silence. They weren't just losing a military engagement. They were being systematically broken down by an enemy that fought on a level they couldn't comprehend. For the first time in his career, Vextai began to understand why experienced mercenaries refused contracts involving humans. The central complex had become Vextai's final fortress, but it felt more like a tomb. Twisted metal and broken machinery surrounded the remaining 23 members of his once proud mercenary company. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on faces marked by exhaustion, and something worse: the hollow look of warriors who had discovered they weren't the apex predators they thought they were. "Movement on all sides," reported Chittick, his insectoid, body trembling as he monitored the life sign detectors. "They've got us completely surrounded. At least 50 contacts, maybe more. They're just waiting out there." Zareth sat against a damaged power console, her red skin pale from blood loss. 3 separate wounds marked where human improvised weapons had found gaps in her supposedly impenetrable armor. "Why don't they just finish us?" she whispered. They could overrun this position in minutes. Darkrell was doing what she could for the wounded, but medical supplies were running low. Half their equipment was damaged, and the facility's own systems had been turned against them so thoroughly that even basic functions like air filtration were suspect. "Maybe they're waiting for us to run out of ammunition," suggested Crix, though. His forearms weren't moving with their usual nervous energy. The demolitions expert had used up most of his explosive charges in futile attempts to breach what he thought were human defensive positions, only to discover they were attacking empty rooms while the real enemy struck from completely different directions. Vextai studied the tactical display one last time. Over the past 18 hours, Terra 7 had systematically dismantled his force with surgical precision. They hadn't just won battles, they had rewritten the rules of warfare itself. Every conventional tactic had been turned inside out. Every advantage had become a liability. The communication system crackled to life with a voice that sounded almost casual, like someone making conversation over dinner. "This is Captain Park Jiho, Terra 7 Actual. I'm requesting permission to approach under a flag of truce for parley." A flag of truce. In 40 years of mercenary warfare, Vextai had seen surrender demands, ultimatums, and psychological warfare, broadcasts. But a formal request for parley? That was something from ancient military traditions, the kind of honor-bound protocols that belonged in history books. "Sir?" Quill looked up from his communication station, uncertainty written across his reptilian features. "How do we respond?" Vextai considered his options. They could refuse and fight to the death, which would accomplish nothing except getting his remaining crew killed. They could surrender unconditionally, which would leave them at the mercy of an enemy they didn't understand. Or they could accept the parley and maybe, just maybe, learn something that would help them survive. "Grant the request," he said finally, "but maintain defensive positions." 20 minutes later, a single figure approached the main entrance to the central complex. Vexti watched through the security cameras as Captain Park Jiho walked calmly across the open ground, making no attempt to use cover or concealment. He carried a simple white cloth attached to a piece of pipe, the universal symbol of truce. The human looked completely ordinary. Average height for his species, maybe 175 centimeters. No obvious cybernetic enhancements, no powered armor, no visible weapons beyond a standard sidearm. His uniform was clean but showed signs of recent combat, and his equipment looked like standard military issue rather than advanced technology. But there was something about his eyes. As Jiho entered the complex and approached their defensive perimeter, Vextai felt his combat instincts trigger warning signals that had kept him alive through 50 campaigns. This human radiated the kind of quiet confidence that came from absolute certainty in his own capabilities. "Captain Vextai," Jiho said politely, stopping at exactly the right distance to be respectful while remaining ready to react to any threat. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "State your terms," Vextai replied, though he suspected this wasn't going to be a simple surrender negotiation. Jiho looked around at the defensive positions, taking in the wounded aliens, the damaged equipment, the desperate last stand atmosphere. "You fight well," he said conversationally. "Your tactical planning was solid, your equipment is first-rate, and your warriors are experienced professionals. Under normal circumstances, you should have won this engagement easily. But you're fighting the wrong war." Vextai leaned forward slightly. "Explain." "Your species evolved on worlds where intelligence meant cooperation, where survival came through avoiding conflict and finding peaceful solutions. When you do fight, it's with the expectation that rational beings will recognize when they're beaten and surrender to preserve their lives." Jiho gestured casually toward the broken facility around them. "Humanity spent millennia as persistence, hunters on a death world where surrender wasn't an option because surrender meant extinction. We're hardwired at the genetic level to view every conflict as potentially existential. This isn't about tactics or technology, he continued, his voice remaining calm and educational. It's about evolutionary psychology. You're fighting a species that survived by never giving up, never backing down, never accepting that anything is impossible if the stakes are high enough. Zarath struggled to sit up straighter. But this is just a mining facility. Corporate contract work. Nothing existential about it. Jiho smiled, and Vextai finally understood why his instincts had been screaming warnings. It wasn't the smile of someone who was happy or amused. It was the expression of a predator explaining why the prey had never had a real chance. To you, this is a business transaction. To us, every battle is practice for the war that might determine whether our species survives. We don't fight to win contracts. We fight to prove that humans can overcome any obstacle through sheer determination and adaptive thinking. He pointed toward the perimeter where his soldiers waited invisibly in the shadows. These aren't just warriors. They're the distilled essence of a species that survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, pandemic diseases, and countless wars by refusing to accept defeat. When we're truly threatened, we access something other races can't understand. The absolute certainty that retreat means extinction. Every human in Terra 7 has been selected and trained to embody this principle. They've fought in environments that would kill most species in hours. They've survived situations where surrender wasn't an option because there was no enemy to surrender to, just hostile conditions that demanded adaptation or death. Crix's forearms began moving again, a sure sign the demolitions expert was processing disturbing information. You're saying humans are psychologically incapable of giving up. Not incapable, Jiho corrected. We choose not to. It's a conscious decision backed by millions of years of evolution. When other species reach their breaking point, humans find another gear. When conventional tactics fail, we improvise. When improvisation isn't enough, we sacrifice everything for the slightest chance of victory. Vextai felt something he hadn't experienced since his first combat mission decades ago. The complete understanding that he was facing something beyond his ability to handle. Not because the humans were stronger or better armed, but because they operated according to rules that didn't exist in his universe. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Your unconditional surrender and immediate withdrawal from this system," Jiho replied. "In exchange, you and your surviving crew will be allowed to leave with your lives and your ship. You'll also carry a message to other mercenary companies about what happens when they accept contracts involving Earthborn units. And if we refuse?" Jiho's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then Terra 7 demonstrates why experienced mercenaries refuse to fight humans under any circumstances. Your choice, Captain. Vextai looked at his remaining crew, 23 professionals who had followed him through dozens of successful campaigns, now reduced to frightened survivors, huddled in a makeshift fortress. They had fought bravely and skillfully, but they were facing an enemy that didn't just want to win. They wanted to break the spirits of everyone who opposed them. "I surrender," he said quietly. The words felt strange in his mouth. In 40 years of warfare, he had never spoken them before. 10 years later, Captain Vextai ran a small freight-hauling operation in the Outer Rim territories. His ship was modest, his cargo was legal, and his crew was small. When potential clients approached him with high-paying contracts that might involve military action, he asked one simple question: any chance of human involvement? If the answer was yes, or even maybe, he politely declined and recommended they find someone else. When pressed for reasons, he would simply say, "Some fights aren't worth the credits no matter how much they're offering." Word spread quickly through the mercenary community. Cantinas would fall silent when someone mentioned Earthborn units. Experienced fighters would shake their heads and walk away from contracts that mentioned human forces. And somewhere in the depths of space, Terra 7 continued their training, ready to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their fearsome reputation, one battle at a time. The legend grew with each telling, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any story. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought like the survival of their entire species depended on every single engagement, bringing an intensity that no other race could match or comprehend. In a galaxy full of warriors, only humans fought like the universe itself was at stake. The end.